The Salton Sea was once a man-made desert oasis, attracting boaters, tourists, and wildlife. Today, it's shrinking, and it's leaving behind toxic dust, a dying ecosystem, and major health concerns for the surrounding community. Hello, listeners, and welcome to H2O and Beyond. My name is Alex Hahn, and each week we dive into the science, systems, and stories behind the water we use every day. To help us learn more about the Salton Sea, I'm joined by Miss Cassandra VanDyne, an interpreter for California State Parks. Welcome to the podcast, Miss VanDyne. It's great to have you on the show.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
So, something I like to ask my guests to do before we start is introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about what you do, the place you work at, and yeah.
Absolutely. So, my name is Cassandra VanDyne, and I'm an interpreter with California State Parks at the Ocotillo Wells District. So, my job as an interpreter is to educate, inspire, and connect people to the landscape that we live in.
Great. Thank you for that. And so I want to assume that our listeners know nothing about the Salton Sea. Where's it located and what is it?
Absolutely. And chances are you've heard something about it, but there's a lot of misinformation out there. So starting with the location, it's located in the southeastern portion of California in present-day Imperial and Riverside County. It's on the ancestral homelands of the Quechan, Kumeyaay, and Kauaian peoples who have been the stewards of this land since time immemorial. And a little bit about the Salton Sea. So it's a desert lake. And this lake has been there periodically throughout history. And it's due to our fault system. So the San Andreas Fault, the southern terminus of the San Andreas Fault, lies directly under the Salton Sea. And this fault system and this miles-wide fault zone has created this lake basin. We'll get more into that later.
Yeah, I'm sure. And, how would you describe the sea to someone who's never seen it before?
It's majestic. So it does look like a mirage. It's in an arid climate. So as you're traveling to the sea, you're going through various areas. Some are described as badlands. We have sand dunes. And you come across this miles-long sea. So it's 13 miles wide by 30 miles long. So it's quite a large lake. And north to south, you can barely see from one end to the other. And if you were to turn 360 degrees around, you're surrounded by these mountains. Some of them are called painted hills, and they do look like watercolors. And it's just really, really an incredibly beautiful place. I will caution or suggest when you visit the Salton Sea, know before you go. So this can be really a different experience in the summertime when it's 110, 115, little humid, little buggy, to in the wintertime when we have our friends that migrate through and it's quite a different temperature experience.
How far away is the Salton Sea from the nearest major city? How far would it be?
So from San Diego, it's 2.5 hours, 3 hours. But to travel around the lake itself, it does take 2 hours. And then it's about an hour and a half to Palm Springs, and then maybe 2.5 hours to LA.
So where do most of your visitors come from? Do they come from the surrounding cities, or do they come from the people already living near the Salton Sea?
Yeah, a lot of people come from LA, and they'll do day trips. And then in the summertime, we get a lot of international visitors that have heard about the Salton Sea. We'll have people from Holland and Germany that will come to visit the Salton Sea. And that's not the time of year that I suggest to come. But we do get people from all over, international and local. And there's a lot of people that live around the Salton Sea. So some of our visitors and the people that use the park for date use are people that live in the surrounding communities.
I see. And you said the temperature in the wintertime, it's a lot cooler than the summer, right? How would you describe it?
I don't have so it can get a little cool
Hmm.
and we're talking Southern California cool. So, like 50s,
Yeah,
40s maybe, at nighttime. And then during the day we're looking at 60s and 70s. So it's maybe sweater weather, but it's pretty comfortable.
I see. And are you recording from the Salton Sea right now, or are you in like another office location?
So I'm recording at our district office.
Hmm.
So I work for Ocotillo Wells District, and there's 5 parks in our district. So the main park, or the largest park, is Ocotillo Wells, which is an off-road park or a state vehicular recreation area. And Salton Sea is our next largest park, and it's a state recreation area. So I'm not at the Salton Sea. I was a little concerned. It does get windy there, and I was concerned of not being able to have the best recording experience.
Oh, I see. So I'm gonna, turn our attention to, the formation of the sea. And I
Yeah.
heard like the formation of the sea, it was an accident, right? Like even though you said the lake has periodically shown up over history, what we see today, it wasn't supposed to be there, right?
Actually, that's a myth. So it's not an accident at all. And best to answer this, we have to travel back in history.
Hmm.
So let's go back 5 million years. So 5 million years ago, this entire area, so all the way north into Palm Springs, would have been underwater. So present day Gulf of California would have extended all that way up. And the Colorado River is flowing into that body of water. What's happening over time is that Colorado River is flowing from the Rockies through the Grand Canyon and carving out that Grand Canyon and picking up sediments and minerals along the way. And those sediments and minerals then get deposited here in the Imperial Valley. So what ended up happening is there was a natural dam that was created that separated a very large lake and then the Gulf of California. And so what happened over time, now that we have the lake and we have the Gulf and this natural dam, so the Colorado River would fill up this large lake up to about 40 feet above sea level. That's the largest or the highest that it filled. And once it filled to that level, the Colorado River would then divert downhill to sea level to the Gulf of California. So when the Colorado River is flowing to the Gulf, what happens at the lake site is water's evaporating away
Hmm.
and sinking into the ground. And so that lake level is getting lower and lower and lower and lower. And what water wants to do is it wants to follow gravity. So eventually, what happens is that lake, instead of going to sea level, it's going to figure out a way to go and flow into this basin. So it's called the Salton Basin,
Hmm.
which at its lowest point is 270 feet below sea level. So that water then would fill up that basin and create this large lake, which we call ancient Lake Cahuilla. And so this periodic emptying and filling up happened numerous of times throughout history. So in the last 1100 years, that happened 6 times. And but today we don't have ancient Lake Cahuilla.
Hmm.
We have what's called the Salton Sea. So sometimes when people think that it's like an accident or a man-made lake, they're thinking about today's current iteration of the lake. But it's really important to note that there has been a lake here numerous times. And we have that large basin, and Mother Nature is going to do her thing and fill up those basins with water. So let's get into today's Salton Sea. So in the late 1800s, as people were coming to this area and settling down, having farms, um, people realized that they needed a little bit more water than was provided naturally. And this was a period when ancient Lake Cahuilla had evaporated away, so it wasn't there. And so people developed a canal system to bring water from the Colorado River
Hmm.
and divert part of the Colorado River up into the Coachella Valley um, to support, to have water to farm and to live off of. Now, these people that just developed the canal system didn't anticipate the amount of water that could flow through the Colorado River. And in 1905, there was tropical storms that filled the Colorado River much higher than normal. And this amount of water broke the levee system,
Hmm.
and the entire Colorado River flowed freely into this basin, into the Salton Basin. And it took 16 months for engineers to get this under control. And in that time, it flooded out farms, it flooded out the railroad, and really caused a lot of destruction. But that was the birth of our current iteration of the Salton Sea. So a lot of people think about it as an accident, but if you reach a little bit further back into history, there's been a lake here numerous times. So maybe we could call it like a engineering oopsie or
Yeah.
something. um, so we have this lake here, but it's a natural occurrence.
Yeah, so you mentioned that this basin where the Salton Valley, it's naturally lower than the surrounding areas. So yeah, of course there's gonna be a lake there. It just so happened to have come and gone. You said 6 times over the past 1100 years.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hmm.
And so, I mean, if humans hadn't built this canal, I'm sure ancient Lake Kawea would have filled up again at some point in time. But since people settled there, they might have been like, oh no, this is like threatening our livelihood. Like, let's
Hmm.
figure out some way that this isn't going to happen.
Was ancient I know like a lot of ancient like lakes and things, they were much bigger than the lakes that exist there today. How big was this ancient lake?
Yeah. So, ancient Lake Kawea, it was 40 feet above sea level,
Hmm.
and the current Salton Sea is 240 feet below sea level. So that would have been about 280 feet higher than what the lake is currently. And a really cool feature to see if when you travel to the Salton Sea, on the west shoreline, if you look to the mountains, you can see this bathtub basin of the shoreline of ancient Lake Kawea.
Oh, so you can actually look up and see where the old lake used to be?
Yeah,
Oh, that's actually really cool.
super cool. Yeah.
So today's Salton Sea, when the dam breached, did that also bring in like new fish, new animals into the Salton Sea basin that weren't there before?
Um, I'm sure some fish did come
Hmm.
along when that levee system broke. But a lot of the fishing that popularized the Salton Sea in the
Hmm.
50s and 60s and 70s, a lot of those species were introduced for recreational opportunities. And as far as like creating a new ecosystem, I mean, the fact that there's a new lake there did create a different ecosystem,
Hmm.
but maybe an ecosystem that had already been there just in the past. And behind me, this is 3.5 million years ago. This is the Colorado River Basin or the Colorado River Delta. But there's water and there's large mammals, a gomphotheres. Um, so these types of animals, like life in this area, was supported by water at one time. So I think maybe not a new ecosystem, but it's a pattern of ecosystems that travel through this area.
How would you describe the ecosystem that lives at the current Salton Sea right now?
So um, there's a few different ecosystems. So you have the shoreline ecosystem, and then there's mountains surrounding. So and then also stretches of desert in between. So there's varying ecosystems that exist within the Salton Basin. Um, so if we talk about the shoreline area, we have plants that are able to live in salty environments. So plants like saltbush and quailbush that can tolerate their roots being in salt. And then along that shoreline environment, we have a lot of shorebirds that benefit from the salty environments and the insects that live there and the little organisms that they're able to eat. Now you travel into the mountains, and there's some areas where there's not a whole lot of plant life, but there's absolutely animals there. So maybe like our coyote might be hanging out in the mountains, maybe coming down to the shoreline to sneak up on a bird and get a little snack. But there is a variety of ecosystems around the Salton Sea.
And you mentioned the birds come here to the Salton Sea. What do they do? Because I know like a lot of other birds, when traveling to these lakes, they like to, stop there and then drink the water and, maybe hunt for some fish. But since the Salton Lake is salty, all they do, eat the fish there.
Yeah. So We've had a change in the number of fish that are out the Salton Sea. So today's Salton Sea doesn't have populations. It's not able to support populations of fish. Um, so today, what birds do when they're on their migratory route, they will stop by the Salton Sea as a refuge. So we have a lot of waterfowl that will overnight in the lake. So this provides protection for them. Although coyotes can swim, uh, many of them are, or there's a lot of birds that are in the sea. So it provides a little bit of protection to be in that water. Also, there's other things to eat other than just the fish. So there's insects and little like algae that those birds will eat. And what we've seen in the past 20 years is we're seeing a transition and we're seeing a decrease in the number of fish-eating birds that visit the sea. And we're seeing more of the shorebirds that can, have like a longer beak and longer legs that can wade into shallow water and eat those algae and the small organisms. So there's been like a transition of the types of birds that we're seeing there. But as far as the migratory birds, it's a really important place for them to stop over, have a break on their long journey. And then, like a safe haven, there's food to eat. And a lot of birds, some birds do drink water and some birds get the water that they need from the food that they eat.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I just realized I never asked why is the Salton Lake salty?
Yeah. So it's a naturally salty basin. So that Salton Basin has had, or sorry, the Salton Basin has had salt deposited for a number of years. So going back 5 million years ago, it was a part of the ocean or the Gulf at one time. And then even fresh water has a little bit of salt in it. So that Colorado River water that we think of as fresh water, it has a small amount of salt in it. And salt is naturally occurring in different minerals. And since this lake is a terminal lake, which what that means is there's no outflow. So things that come to this basin, they stay here. So as the Colorado River is depositing that fresh-ish water into the Salton Basin, it's depositing a little bit of salt and a little bit of salt and a little bit of salt over time. And so what ends up happening is that is a lot of salt. So it's a salty body of water. And then it's being increased because how the lake is sustained today. So one thing that we didn't talk about is just like ancient Lake Cahuilla evaporated away, the Salton Sea should have evaporated away also, maybe about 25 or 30 years after its creation. But 120 years later, we still have this sea or this lake. And the reason that we have it is because of the agriculture in the valley. So, and our farms do great work providing vegetables and other crops that are needed. So the farmers will get this water from the canal system. They'll use it on their fields. And since there's salt in the soil, one of the things they need to do in order for the plants to grow is they have to add a lot of water so some of the salt leaches out. So that adds more salt to the body of water, as well as anything that's being put on those crops as the water is running off downhill into this salty basin. Those things that we put on our crops like fertilizers, those things are also running into the Salton Sea. So those also increase the salinity of the Salton Sea.
So the only reason you guys still have water in this lake is because of is it the human activity surrounding the lake? All that runoff flows in there. Is that the only reason why the lake exists today still?
Yeah. So it's been, I think it exists today because it's being filled by that water, but it also serves another purpose of providing recreational opportunities for humans. So it is being filled on a daily basis, or at least being added to on a daily basis. by the stormwater runoff. But I think it's provided a lot of different opportunities for the area.
And back when, I think it was the 1960s and 1970s, I know this place used to be booming with activity. Land developers were buying up land. I think they were making like hotels there at one point. And the
Yeah,
tourism industry was really big there. Can you tell us a little bit more about what things were like back then?
absolutely. So in the 1950s and 60s and into the early 70s, this area was a hotspot, and people would come from Hollywood to come vacation here. You had stars like the Beach Boys that would come, and there was a bunch of boating activities. There was races going on. There was yacht clubs, and it was very popular for tourism. And so if you would have come here, let's say in the 1960s, um, there would have been throughout the year over 1.5 million visitors per year and 61,000 boats that are launched. So it's a really, really popular area for people to come visit. Unfortunately, that's not how it is today, or
Mhm.
fortunately. But what happened was in the 1970s, there were some tropical storms. And tropical storms are not doing positive things to the Salton Sea. Like it happened, it broke the levee system. And then now in the 70s, these tropical storms. So in 1976, a tropical storm came through and flooded the area. So it flooded the yacht club, flooded people's houses, and left a lot of destruction. People are resilient. They rebuilt. But in the very next year, 1977, there was another tropical storm that came and flooded the area. So that was the start of the decline of a lot of the tourism of the Salton Sea. But I will say today, there are a lot of communities that live around the Salton Sea and call the Salton Sea home and have been there for decades. So there are still a lot of people that live near and around the Salton Sea.
And I think something interesting I saw online was that you guys have had like a bunch of speedboat records set in the Salton Sea. Is that correct?
Yeah. So there were, I think it was called I saw one race that was called the Salton 500.
Hmm.
Um, and these records were set because of the elevation of the lake. So because it's so far below sea level, and then also because of the salt, I think increases the buoyancy of the boat. Um, so that's why there are these races that were held there. And today you're still allowed to launch a boat into the Salton Sea, but there's no, a lot of our docks and boat
Hmm.
ramps are dry because the Salton Sea in recent years has decreased.
Do you
Just
think?
want to mention
Yeah.
that before anyone comes out to train for their next world record.
And do you think these water levels will keep decreasing as time goes on, or do you think the people surrounding the lake will just keep filling it back up?
So the recent decrease
Hmm.
is because some of the water rights were sold to other communities. So the farmers are getting less water, and then also implementing better water use practices on our farms. Um, but it will even out. I think the Salton Sea will find an equilibrium. So currently, it is decreasing about a vertical foot a year, and has been decreasing since 2017. Um, but I think it will find a new equilibrium, and that will be our current Salton Sea.
What you mentioned, tourism has also declined in the recent years. Why do you think that is?
A few things. So having dry boat ramps and docks decreases the amount of recreation that people are able to do. And additionally, because it's a salton or a salty lake, and that salt has increased over the years, um, that didn't allow for any fish to live in the sea. So what's happened because the salt has increased over time is the fish population starting dying off. So in the 1990s, there was the first big die off of fish. And if you would have come here, you would have seen millions of fish on the shoreline. unfortunately rotting away. Now, if you're going to go on vacation, I'm sure, or maybe not sure, but I wouldn't choose an area that has a bunch of rotting fish.
Mhm.
Um, so I think that was one issue that led to the decrease in tourism of the area. There's not as there's no fishing in the area. The boat ramps are dry. Um, but one of the recreational opportunities that people come to the Salton Sea for is those birds. So we're along the Pacific Flyway, and there's over 400 species that stop at the Salton Sea, that use the Salton Sea on their migratory route or are year-round residents.
When you search up pictures of the Salton Sea online, you see a lot of pictures of these fish, just like the bones lying around the sea. So yeah, I guess it's a pretty big issue. Are you guys still experience? Oh, you're not experiencing die-offs because I think all the fish have died already, right? Is that
Yeah, so the last species of fish that could hang on or were able to tolerate the most amount of salt were the tilapia. So the tilapia experienced their die-off in 2017. And yeah, so 2017 was last year we experienced a fish die-off. And it's a little interesting when you go to the Salton Sea and you're walking on the shoreline. It's not a sandy beach, but if you look down, you actually see crushed up fish bones and
Mhm.
barnacles that have washed ashore. So it's a little different. But yeah, so there's no more fish in the sea currently. It just really can't support any population of fish.
What types of fish have you guys had in the past before these big die-offs?
Uh, so we had tilapia. I mentioned that one, and I don't recall the names of the other fish
Mhm.
um, that people would catch. A lot of them were not native to the area. They were put in the sea for recreational purposes. My understanding is that some agency scooped up a bunch of different fish from an ocean or maybe the Gulf and put them in the Salton Sea to see what would take. Um, and I'll also though speak about there is one fish that lives in or around the Salton Sea and is native to the area. It's called the desert cutfish. It's a very small fish, about this big, and it has a really cool story that is in line with the Salton Sea. So its eggs can live, and scientists are still researching this, but its eggs can live outside of water, and then once the eggs like rehydrate and are in water, they will hatch. So it kind of lines up with that pattern of a lake being gone and then filling back up like ancient Lake Cahuilla.
So actually, these fish, this type of fish, it actually might have existed, back when the Salton Sea was dry, and then when it got filled back up, scientists think these fish might have spawned in again from the eggs.
Yeah, yeah. And at the Salton Sea State Recreation, we have an area called Varner Harbor, and it's a fresher body of water. And those fish, the desert pupfish, do live in Varner Harbor.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people are concerned with saving the Salton Sea and filling up the water levels again because, like I mentioned, I touched on briefly before, but you guys, I know it's a problem with the toxic dust that's coming up from the lake bed, so people do want to help save the Salton Sea. What's happening right now to address this concern?
Yeah. So there's a lot of organizations that are working to create solutions for the Salton Sea. And there's an organization called Save Our Sea. Um, I can't speak for those organizations of what they're doing, but at California State Parks, what we're doing is we're maintaining these 14 miles of shoreline that we manage. So our mission is to protect the biodiversity and the natural and cultural resources of the area, as well as provide high value recreation. So we're maintaining those 14 miles of shoreline. And if people, come to visit, we will share the history of the area. We will share some of the natural resources that they could see, and as well as provide day use areas and camping facilities. And we host bird walks throughout the year. So at state parks, that's what we're doing to help um, support the sea.
And this might be a tough question, but would you actually think it's safe to visit the sea right now? Would you still encourage people to come by?
Yeah. If people are concerned, they can always check the air quality ahead of time. But I visit the Salton Sea. I've walked on the shoreline. Um, I think as far as human safety, there's other people that can speak more to that. But as far as visiting it, um, there's no regulations against it. There's not any levels of anything that would cause of concern to visit it. Are there some days where there's a lot of wind blowing and it's I forget what they call it, like, but the air quality isn't as good. So that might not be a day that you want to visit.
Yeah, and listen for you listeners listening. I'm currently trying to get in contact with some of the researchers that are actually doing public health studies on what exactly is causing this dust to blow up and what this dust is doing to humans. So if you guys are interested, I'll probably in the next upcoming weeks have an episode on that. So yeah, stay tuned. And back to the episode. I know there was once a plan to import water from the Sea of Cortez. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, so there's been a number of solutions that have been proposed to bring the salinity of the Salton Sea down. And I don't think I provided the numbers on the salinity earlier in the show, but the Salton Sea currently is about 7% salinity. And in comparison to the Pacific Ocean's 3.5%. So it's roughly double the Pacific Ocean. Um, so the Sea of Cortez or the Gulf of California, same bodies of water, different names. So the Gulf of California currently is a little bit more saline than the Pacific Ocean. I believe it sits about 3.6%, so just 0.1%. Um, but that 0.1% is a lot for those animals and those plants that rely on that ecosystem. So, Alex, you can imagine if you were to connect the Gulf of California, which is already a little bit saltier than it should be,
Hmm.
to a body of water like the Salton Sea that's at 7% salinity, how destructive that might be
Yeah.
for that habitat.
Yeah, I mean, I can see, you never want to really have human intervention in nature without planning all of these things out because, there can always be unplanned side effects that could be, irreversible. So, yeah, I could see why they decided not to go through with that.
Yeah, and I can't speak more of what the plans were,
Mhm.
um, but I can just imagine that would be devastating
Yeah.
for that ecosystem.
And, if a listener wants to help out with the Salton Sea, is there anything they could do? Is there any?
Yeah, absolutely. I think they're doing the first thing is they're learning about the Salton Sea. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there. So as you learn about the Salton Sea, whether you're watching documentaries or YouTube videos, or you're attending the Salton Sea Summit that has peer-reviewed, scientifically backed um, educational opportunities, really think about what you're learning and the source of it. So I think the first thing is knowledge. And if people want to come visit the Salton Sea, I think that is the best thing you can do to learn about a place. But I will also caution before you go, you should plan ahead. So
Mhm.
if you're coming in the summer, if that's the only time that you have available, we can look to the animals and lizard out is what I say. So maybe come in the morning or in the evening time when it's coolest. Um, but the best time to visit is the fall, winter, and spring when the temperatures are a little bit more comfortable. And then we have those migratory birds coming through.
Well, thank you for that, Miss Van Dyne. And as we wrap up the episode, are there any last words you would like to say to our audience?
Yeah, I really appreciate this opportunity. And I think the Salton Sea is such a unique place. It has such um, a rich history, both natural and cultural history. And I really enjoyed being able to learn about it. And I thank you for taking the time to ask some questions and get to know it more.
Well, thank you, Miss Van Dyne, for joining me today on H2O and Beyond. It was a pleasure having you on the show.
Absolutely. Well, Alex, before we go, I'm going to ask you, what's your favorite body of water?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think the only one that I'm really familiar with is Lake Lanier, which is just a 40-minute drive from my house in in Metro Atlanta. So it was actually they intentionally flooded this. Yeah, they intentionally flooded it, and now it's actually the main source of water for Atlanta, I believe. So yeah, it's pretty interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah,
Well, I mean, keep it local, right?
and there's actually I think they flooded like a residential area, so people actually call it like a ghost town lake. So underneath the lake, there's like houses under it.
Oh
Yeah,
my God.
yeah. So
I
if you Google it, I'm sure you can learn more.
okay, I've heard of a few different lakes that have flooded. Like there's a natural basin that people
Hmm.
build on, and then there's ghost towns underneath. So
Yeah, I
that's
think it
really
was in like the
interesting.
1960s they did that, and yeah, it's still there, and we're probably the glass of water I'm drinking right now is probably Lake Lanier water.
Well, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing. And if you find yourself in Southern California, be sure to stop by the Salton Sea.
Well, yeah, I'm sure. I'll share. If I come visit, I'll come find you, and I'd be glad to take a tour with you.
Okay, that would be awesome. Well, thank you, Alex. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Miss Van Dyne. Well, listeners, as you can follow the Salton Sea through their socials, which I'll link in the description below. And make sure to share this episode with your coworkers and friends if you found it helpful. There's also a Google form linked in the description as well for episode suggestions or if you'd like to become a guest on the podcast. And finally, make sure to follow our socials through the link tree in our bio. Thank you for listening to H2O and Beyond. I'm Alex Hahn. Stay curious and stay hydrated.